I've been meditating about the Sermon on the Mount and how if you want to have a great and successful and fulfilling life, the Sermon on the Mount should be a daily thing that you could read through for a couple months. It's only 3 chapters, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And it describes, number one, it describes the character of Christ, the perfect human being, the fully God, fully man. It also describes the ethics that every Christian should be following. And if we're not following, we could be in a life of sin. But a couple of things I was thinking about is the very first couple verses has Jesus standing and seeing the crowds. He went up on a mountainside and he sat down. And then his disciples gathered around him and he taught them. Now, it could be that he taught his disciples. Of course he did. But how much of the crowds were there? I don't know. I know leadership-wise that if you teach the leaders, the followers will listen. There's a bunch of symbolic things going on in that, one of which is that Jesus went up on the mountainside, and in literature, mountainside is a place of illumination, of revelation. If you stay with the scriptures, Moses went up on a mountainside for 40 days and came back down with the 10 Commandments. If you look at the life of Elijah, he challenged the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel and was successful, and everybody knew who God was and came back to God because of that. During the life and ministry of Jesus while on earth, he took 3 of those disciples later on up on a mountainside and transfigured himself before them, revealing who he really was, fully God at that point, and was visited by Elijah and Moses. But here he is up on a mountainside. He sat down and he begins to teach his disciples. He begins a revelation, a revelatory teaching of who he really is. And he begins with the Beatitudes. Blessed are the weak, blessed are the poor, blessed are, and I'll talk about that some other time. The other thing I want to bring up is sometimes it's best to read the last portion of a section of scripture like that to see what the focus really was, because that was a climax at that point, at the very end of the chapter 7, where Jesus tells a parable about 2 men, one building his house on sand, and when winds and waves and storms beat against it, came against it, it fell. And he told the story of a man who built his house on rock, a firm foundation. And when the same winds, the same storm, the same waters rose up and beat against it, it stood. And Jesus' meaning, his own interpretation of that parable, short parable, is that anyone who hears his words and applies it to his life is like the man who built his house upon a rock. That when the storms of life and when the rains and when the winds and when the water will come against you, your life will stand. So the Sermon on the Mount, like I said, I've been meditating just about it and realized that he's revealing his life, who he is, but he's also revealing how he wants us to be as followers of Jesus, his disciples who are taught by him. This is your friend, this is your pastor, this is Mike, and this is part 1 on the Sermon on the Mount.